We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal,
endowed by their creator
with certain unalienable rights.
That among these are life,
liberty, and the
pursuit
pursuit
of
of happiness.
I am here today to acknowledge and represent the African American girls whose stories don't make the front page of every national newspaper. Whose stories don't lead on the evening news. I represent the African American women who are victims of gun violence, who are simply statistics instead of vibrant, beautiful girls that full of potential.
The fact that there has yet to be an arrest of the murder of Breonna Taylor, and kind of touching on, what are the thoughts of the erasure of Black women and also Black trans women, also, bringing Iana Dior into the conversation, 2 Black trans back to back within 48 hours. And so, Naomi, how you opened up your speech with, I'm here on behalf of every Black girl that has been killed. Can you just speak on just the fact that, Black brought into the conversation when it comes to gun violence?
Breonna Taylor's case is something that I feel is very personal to me because she's another Black woman. I feel as if she's my sister. She could have been my mom. She could be anybody around me. And I do notice that her case has got less and less attention from the public eye as opposed to George Floyd's. And so, of course, Twitter related to Breonna, but there's not really, not enough made an arrest. And I also noticed that her murder wasn't punished. Like you said, there wasn't an arrest that was made, but there was no statement from the police's office, and there was nobody who really addressed the situation publicly and said that it was wrong. Last night, the police chief in Atlanta stepped down, and so you can see from these other cases of Black men that the police chiefs and the people who are responsible are taking some sort of action to prevent that from happening again, regardless of whether or not it's a valid or correct response. However, in Breonna's case, I noticed that that's not really happening, and that's something that we see with a lot of Black women, Black women, Indigenous women, women of color in general, who are missing and who names, and we're not remembering who they are, and they go into the forms of statistics. They're more likely to be pushed out of school, they're more likely to get demoted or suspended, and while we read those statistics and we learn more about that, we don't know who they are, and we don't think of them as specific people, we think of them as a number. So I think what's really important is to bring light to Breonna's case, and not only Breonna's case, not only holding her case as an example of all Black women, but as I said, all Black women and all Black girls who are affected by gun violence and racially charged violence in general.
Absolutely. And Jahi, today you wrote a long post about the erasure of Black women, and it really resonated with me. And so my question is, what can we expect, or when it comes to, saying we have allies, I think it also goes both ways, having allies within our own community, up for Black women and Black trans women and Black queer women, and then also making sure that Black and brown women also, pull up for y'all. So what advice do you have to this conversation of the erasure of Black women?
When we're talking about the nuances and the complexities of race in America, I think it's important that we acknowledge how racism affects different people, especially different people of different backgrounds. And the eccentricities that Black women have that are analyzed by our culture are revealed. And the part that isn't acknowledged and the part that isn't talked about enough, like I said in the post, is the endangerment of the existence of Black women. And I think for a lot of young Black men, the aftermath and the repercussions of white supremacy has affected our mindset and has affected the way that we view masculinity. And a lot of us viewed masculinity as aggressiveness and dominance. And I was in a film called Clean and Slim, and it was sort of controversial, and it was starring a Black man and a Black woman. And while many people, including our own people, had controversial and nuanced opinions about it, one of the things that I think can be respected about the way in which Lena Waithe the writer of the film depicted the story was, we had a Black man and a Black woman who both had their own respectable opinions, and neither one was dominated and neither one was emasculated. And I think that that's something important for Black men to remember. When you revere a Black woman and you honor the majesty of Black women, you are not diminishing the righteousness and the majesty of your own masculinity. And your reverence of Black women shouldn't stop you from you came from a Black woman. The first person who I ever deemed beautiful was a dark-skinned Black woman. And I think my mother telling me her own stories at a young age of growing up in DC and during the crack epidemic, and people telling her that she was beautiful for a dark-skinned girl, those things in my mind are permanent. Those things are permanently embedded in my mind. And so it always infuriates me when I see someone come for any kind of Black woman of any different background, whether she's a trans Black woman, whether she is a Black woman who's a member of a heterosexual Black woman. It just infuriates me and it enrages me because of the love and affection that I have for the Black women in my life, in my own circles, for their contributions to the movement and their contributions to just life, our culture, to not be erased by us or anybody else.
I mean, I was in a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with, some of my peers, a similar conversation when we were talking about the erasure of Black women in the media. And I said some of these statements, but I think it's worth repeating. As early as 5 years old, Black girls are seen more adult-like and less innocent than their white female peers. That means that, we don't necessarily give Black girls the space or the opportunity to be children, to be seen as innocent. And we constantly set these standards and rules for them on how to act, how to dress, don't be too angry or too loud so that you aren't portrayed as the angry Black woman. And actually, there's a quote that, I go back to a lot, and it is, the most disrespected woman in America is a Black woman. The most unprotected person in America is a Black woman. And the most neglected person in America is a Black woman. And that's a small excerpt from a speech that Malcolm X gave on May 5th, 1962, at the funeral service of Ronald Stokes in LA, who was ironically killed by LAPD. And to me, Malcolm's comments echoes sentiments made by, various people, but also including Zora Neale Hurston's "In Their Eyes We're Watching God." In the novel, there comes a key moment, I don't know if you all have seen it, but there comes a key moment where Jamie Crawford watches a group of men play with a mule. And, she recalls her nanny's words that the Black woman is the mule of the world. And so that basically means that the mule finds itself tortured and burdened with, hardship for no reason other than the sake of burdening it. The mule carries this weight with no voice or agency of its own. And the mule reminds her of the Black woman in America who must suffer and endure. And she suffers not because of any choice of her own, but precisely because she has no choice in the matter. And I'm only 16, and I feel that weight of being a young Black girl in America.
What's really important in this moment is taking advantage of the fact that we have everyone's ear, right? Mm-hmm. It's a really important moment in terms of the revolution, and defunding the police, I think, is a very important conversation for us to always include, and abolishing the police, as radical as that sounds. It's not as radical as the stuff we're having to see on television. That's what's insane. That's what's radical. And it's not the first time that something that was so economically and structurally the framework of this country has been abolished. Think about that. There was something else that this country needed economically and structurally to function that was abolished. So why is it so hard to imagine a world without the police, a world without prisons? Mm-hmm. Black people make up 13% of this population and 70% of the prison population. The prison industrial complex is an extension of slavery. You all know that. I know I'm not preaching. I'm saying it for the purpose of this being recorded. You all know that. I think that the important thing about now is, yes, talking about the racism that exists, because there are so many important conversations. Ava and Jade, I'm sure that like your friends and your families are having new conversations. That is so important. And it needs to continue to happen, the conversations around racism, because it's multifaceted, but it's time for us to imagine something new.
Absolutely.
Defunding police ultimately means that money is being directed into community wellness and thinking about like how can we create safe spaces that, you know, people like to talk about crime. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about this. People like to talk about crime, but what creates crime? It's the lack of having things that we need. So if that money, I think in LA, our police budget is $3.1 billion. If that money is being directed towards community services, we won't have all of this crime, right? People will have what they need. And there are several statistics that show you that if people have what they need and they are stable, no one committing these crimes. You won't go to Beverly Hills and hear about, you know, people shooting each other and people looting stores just because they have everything that they need. So, yeah, defunding, abolition is not something to be scared of. Ultimately, if societies do not break themselves apart and create newer, better things than in society to begin with.
I mean, that was everything that you said was absolutely on point. And I also want to hand it over to Sarah, because I know that Sarah has been incredibly vocal about defunding the police as well, but also just having law enforcement on our campuses when you do see law enforcement at the schools. You know, could you talk about that, Sarah?
Yeah, totally. I just want to say something before I get into it. I see a lot of people kind of trying to derail the defunding movement and the abolition movement, because they go hand in hand with reform, as if we haven't tried that already. Like these body cams and, you know, all these different things that haven't worked. And violence has been in the rise, and that has been perpetuated by police. And like it starts specifically in school. LASPD has a $70 million budget in USD, which is wild because that amount of money is not being invested into, or could be invested into, PSWs and peer counselors. We have like 25% of students are arrested in elementary and middle schools, and they are Black, and that happens disproportionately. And you also see that with arrests in the district, where Blacks make up 8% of arrests in the district. Black students make up 8% of the district, but 25% of them make up the arrest demographic. So, you know, this is not only happening in our communities, not what we see out here. You know, children are experiencing it in places where they're supposed to be safe. You know, school is a place where you're supposed to learn and you're supposed to thrive. And you're supposed to be not only academically, but creatively as well. And that is not being handed to, especially in Black communities where you have predominantly Black students in Black neighborhoods. So yeah, and if we take that $70 million worth of a budget that is given to LASPD and put it towards spaces for creative expression and restorative and transformative justice and peer counseling, that would be so great. There will be students who, you know, I call them like baby entrepreneurs on our campus, who have these ideologies, who have these thoughts that are not being supported in our schools. Because we have that type, we're heavily criminalized. I know at Dorsey, there was an incident where students had gotten into a fight and they had pepper sprayed them. And it was one police officer, but he ended students, and people were trying to get to class or being pepper sprayed. I had a friend who was pepper sprayed. She came into class running and she asked for milk. Thankfully, we had that BIC milk in the back, and she washed her eyes out with it. But, you know, we're seeing this, and we went to school the next day, and it's being ingrained into our heads that that is normal and that we're supposed to get by. We're supposed to live on and move on, because that's just another experience. It's just another day that we're living it. And that's not normal. You know, you're teaching kids that violence is okay, and that it is an end all be all, and that, you know, that's to de-escalate situations. And that is completely wrong. These kids are learning that in schools, and they're going to carry it on throughout their lives, and later on perpetuate that onto people that they love. So it's an ongoing cycle. Everything is interconnected deeply. And, you know, it starts with defunding and then gradually goes towards abolition. And like, I strongly urge people to, you know, if you can't protest, post a post, you know, post the protests that are going on in the streets. Post as much information that you have. I know.
You help us, we help them. Compassion is ingrained in love. That's the answer, but we answer to the opposite direction of the cause. Black bodies, they don't care. You see me unaware of what's on my mind. Black bodies, oh, I need you to see me, yeah. Got some good change in my heart. That's where change gotta start. That's where change gotta start.